ground, got tech developers working to be rolling out, as I said, some new services. So, you know, what exactly does that mean? There's going to be more bespoke networking. So at the end of this session, we'll go into breakout rooms where women can get to know each other in smaller groups. But that's done on a very sort of random basis. You'll be allocated automatically to the rooms. But what we're going to be doing or rolling out, as I said, is bespoke networking. So we'll be grouping you together based on areas of property that you're interested in, whether that's rent to rent, HMOs, development, etc. So you'll be able to speak to other women also interested in the same strategies as you. We'll be doing networking based on location. So you'll get to meet women who live near you. So, you know, if you want to meet up in groups of 6, you'll be able to. We'll be doing it based on location of where you're interested in investing in. So various different formats. We're also going to be giving free weekly workshops on different topics, from property to mindset to how do you build a business, because all of these things are relevant when it comes to property investing. And there's going to be, you know, lots more sort of bespoke services as well to really help you identify what is the investment path that's best for you, because what's right for one person won't be right for everybody. And so what we realized is we needed to find a way that we can work with each of you independently to help you sort of create your unique goals. And then collectively as a community, we can all support each other and help each other to get there. So I'll stop rambling on about that, but you'll see those services once they're rolled out, and we'll, you know, flag them to you as well. And as I said, if there's anything else that you think would be great that we could be doing or we should be doing, just let us know. We're here to support as best we can. So without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Sandi Rhys Jones. Oh, fantastic. I can now see myself, which is great. So I will read a few sort of nuggets from Sandi's bio. So Sandi is a self-confessed compulsive builder who began her long career in the male-dominated construction and property industry as a journalist. After that, she worked for a variety of technical organizations before forming her management and marketing business with clients in every sector of the industry, from the UK and overseas. When not restoring crumbling period houses, Sandi actively participates in a number of industry working groups on diversity and women in the workplace. Sandi was awarded an OBE in 1998 for her work promoting women in construction. And I believe Sandi also leads the national mentoring scheme for the Association of Women in Property as well. So I am absolutely delighted to hand over to Sandi. So Sandi, take it away.
Thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to be here with so many great women. And as always happens here, I've prepared my presentation. I thought I knew what I was going to say, and I only have to chat with half a dozen of you. And remember when I first met you, Aisha, at Imperial College, and think, well, actually, what I really want to say is this. So I'll do a little bit of sticking to the script and a little bit of just responding to some of the thoughts that we've shared already. And I'll start by saying that I'm very conscious that I'm sitting here, and those of you who can see me probably recognize that this is not an inner city flat that I'm sitting in. This is a cottage in the Cotswolds with beams and a 6-foot wide fireplace and stone walls that are 2 foot thick. And the reason I have it is because many years ago, when I had a succession of chaps turning up trying to sell me pension programs, I'd say to them, well, how does this pension work? Go through it again. And they'd say, well, you give us some money and we look after it for you. And in 40 years, we give you some money back, and it might go up and it might go down. And I remember looking at one particular chap who had frayed cuffs and a not very smart suit, thinking, well, this doesn't seem to be such a bright idea. I'm not sure I want to hand over a lot of money to this chap and leave it in a drawer for a bit, and then maybe when I'm old and craggy, I'll get some money. Why don't I spend what money I've got with my husband on something I do understand that is tangible? So we bought a pile of stone in the hills, in the Cotswolds, 2 weeks before I had our first son. So I huffed and puffed my way up the hills, looking at 3 properties to choose from. It was just after the M4 was open, so that seemed like a good idea. And we didn't know how we were going to pay for it, really. But we just knew we had a bit of equity in the first house we bought, which we found by knocking on doors and saying to people, are you thinking of selling? And that's another story. Anyway, this is my pension pot, which has given me much more fun than a bit of paper stuck in the drawer, flogged to me by a chap with fraying cuffs. And we've held on to it through thick and thin, through the good times and the bad times. It's provided holidays, it's provided me with a learning curve on all my building skills, and it's huge pleasure. So there was I beginning to have a bit of imposter syndrome, thinking I haven't got a portfolio of 15 buy-to-let properties. But looking back, this whole relationship with property and what it can do for you started way, way back, and I've never regretted it. And it's tangible, and you can do something with it, and it gives you freedom. And the most important thing is, it taught me one particular golden rule, which is, if somebody tells you when you outline a plan, you must be mad, you're probably doing the right thing. Because those people who say to you, you're buying a cottage 2 weeks before you're having your first child, and they're holding your job open for you, and you've got this pile of stuff in Greenwich you haven't finished converting yet, you must be mad. Those are the people who 2 years later say to you, you're so lucky to have that house in the Cotswold and that place in Greenwich, in brackets, which nobody else would take on because it had rising damp as far as your waist. So there is, one of the lessons I learned was, if people think you're bonkers, you've probably got quite a good idea. And that really does work with property. So I better go back to the script, hadn't I? What was I told to talk about? I was told to talk about being queen bee, which is interesting really, because for a long time, if you were a queen bee, most people hated your guts, but never mind. Let's talk about being a queen bee in terms of building a strong team. You've already heard a bit about me. I've run a business for a long time, so I've been an employer. I've been an employer through 3 recessions, and I managed to hold on to all my staff each time through those 3 recessions. And it taught me to hold on to a team, because you must have the confidence that the work will come back, and you need to have your team when the work comes back. It also taught me that you need to find a balance between business reality and having a group that you can really operate with and enjoy having and build and develop. But I'm also, apart from being an employer, I'm increasingly now a speaker, a trainer, facilitator. I have what's called a portfolio career. So I'm a non-exec director. My first non-exec director post I got some time ago, and it was for Docklands Light Railway, which was absolutely brilliant because it was an amazing piece of engineering. It transformed South East London. I joined the board when they were extending the Docklands Light Railway to Lewisham and then going on to City Airport. And it transformed that part of London that was just neglected because there was no serious public transport. They were a fantastic executive. And the best bit was my 3 sons were dead jealous because I had my own train set. So all in all, it was a brilliant job. And I'm currently on the board of a sustainable building products company, and I've been a director of a variety of companies. I'm a mediator and an arbitrator, and that's because one of my major clients for many years was an international federation of engineers around the world. And that was brilliant because it meant that I went to meetings from Tokyo to Auckland to Vienna to Berlin. So it took me around the world. I was usually the only woman in the room, and I got involved in drafting contracts. And we reached a stage always where we'd worked out what we wanted to do to make a project work. And then somebody in the room who was the lawyer would suck their teeth and say, oh, we need to think about that. So if you can't beat them, join them. I did a master's in construction law and arbitration. And I then went on to be a mediator because I think we have to sort out our problems constructively and not by going through the courts. I'm a wife, a mum, a grandmum, I'm a writer, a cook, a gardener, and I am a compulsive builder. So yesterday I finished converting the small bunk room in this cottage into a larder, because I've also acquired an allotment. So I've got all this stuff in bottles and jars. So I've converted a bunk room to a larder, and I also assembled a flat pack garden bench that my son sent to my husband for his birthday, which is today. So that's a sort of thumbnail. Let's go back to talking about, have I got my slides showing? Am I onto my slides?
No,
there we
you
go.
haven't got your slide showing yet.
Right, can I have them now? Can you control that, or should it be me?
I think you just have to share your screen.
Right, I'm back into share my screen. Right, sorry everybody. Lulled into a false sense of security here. Here we go, share screen. Voila. Okay, so what's on the tin? Can everybody see a slide called constructive thinking? Any answers? Yes,
we can
great.
see several of the slides.
Oh, right. Oh, we need to go into slideshow then, don't we? How about that?
Perfect.
Perfect. Right. Constructive thinking. What's on the tin? What I'm going to talk about, and I ought to get a move on, is I think there are three key elements here, which is the difference between leadership and management. How to be heard when your voice is softer, which is something we all face as women in this male-dominated industry, and then finding and keeping the right team. So where do we start between the difference between leadership and management? Well, I think that they are different, but it's a relationship that's symbiotic. You need both. If I have founded a business back in 1976, and I had to be a leader because I had to find the work. How do you find and win work unless you're a leader and you can drive it? But at the same time, you have to be a manager, because if you can't manage your business, you go broke. So I think that it's really important to know that there is a relationship between the two. And I think the other really important thing to know about is you need to recognize yourself, and you need to recognize other people. One of the interesting things about leadership is so many leaders I know in the industry don't see themselves as leaders. Most true leaders are a bit surprised when people say, well, you're a great leader. So there's a certain bit of surprise. You just get on and do things. And there was a big piece of research into leadership.
What do you mean? I'm fishing my pasta.
And they were surprised if they were approached and asked to give their advice, because they didn't see themselves as leaders. So it's quite important to recognize what your strengths are. One of the useful tools, do people know about SWOT analysis? Is SWOT analysis a management tool that's familiar to people? It's recognizing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The opportunities and threats are the things going out around you, and the strengths and weaknesses are the things about yourself. And what's really useful sometimes is to sit down and do your own SWOT analysis on yourself and think to yourself, what do I think I'm good at? What do I need more help on? What are the opportunities in front of me? What are the threats? Recognizing that actually threats and opportunities are often very much the same thing. And then look at the others who are around you, the people in your team, or maybe the people you're involved with, and do a bit of analysis on them as well. I think the other really important thing for women in property is there's an element of surprise still. Although there are so many more of us in the industry and the profession, it's always a bit of a surprise when a woman turns up, or if you're the one making the decisions. Make the most of it. We mustn't be defensive about being the only woman in the room. Revel in it and take the high ground. And the other really important thing is to keep learning. And I'll touch on that a bit later. So here's the element of surprise. That's me a couple of years ago, because I got so fed up with waiting for people who were turning up to sort out a flat I was trying to let to do a relatively simple job. So in the end, I thought, to hell with this, I'm going to put the fence up. And I show this slide sometimes because people think, oh, well, she's a professional woman in the construction industry. She's sitting there at a desk doing contracts. Knowing what it takes to get the job done so you can make the business work for you is really important. And the chap who then turned up the next day to finish the job was so taken aback that I'd got on and done it, that he did a decent job to follow on. So make the most of the element of surprise. It was a very hot day. That's why I'm wearing that genuine coolie hat, which I acquired on a trip to Japan. And this really picks up one of the things I've just said, which is make the most of the element of surprise and make the most of being the only person who looks like you in the project. A friend of mine was an engineer whose first job was on one of the major bridges. And she turned up and she was the only woman on the team. And there were half a dozen young chaps there. And she said, but everybody knew who I was. I was Elizabeth because they could differentiate me. The five or six young chaps who were there were just young chaps. And she made the most of it and became a very effective engineer and went on very well. And I talked about keep on learning. When I did my master's in construction law, the first day of the course, I felt slightly uncomfortable because everybody else was well qualified. And I was sat next to a chap who was a barrister and a civil engineer. And I thought, well, I don't know why he's here because he can obviously do it already. And how am I going to catch up? And he turned to me and said, they don't seem to have organised lunch. Would you care to have lunch with me in Middle Temple? I thought, yeah, that's all right. So we trotted off to Middle Temple and we had a very nice lunch halfway through the learning. And the next morning I had a telephone call and a man said, you don't know who I am, but David Ballard tells me that I need you. That led on to a 25-year contract with a major construction industry association because of the link. So I had my fees paid for that construction law course in the first day, and it led to a client that then led to other work. So it was more than CPD and developing skills. It opened a whole new network. Now, so how to be heard when your voice is softer. I don't know, we've got a mixed group of people in the room. I don't know how many of you are fighting to be heard or trying to make your moment. Just a few tips on how to be audible and visible when you're in a crowded place. And we're in a very noisy environment at the moment. I think the really most important thing is to work out what it is. What are the key points you want to say? And then choose your moment and hold the room and hold the moment. Pick your platform, decide where it is that you're going to have the most impact. And the really most important thing, and I think this is what more women need to know, don't underestimate what you know. I have a tendency still to think to myself, well, that's obvious. You know, everybody knows that. I know that, therefore everybody knows that. They don't. And if they do, they might not think about it in the same way. So have confidence in what you know and know that it has value. Pick your platform, choose your moment, and then come out with it. I was on a committee for quite a while with a number of senior construction people and property people. And somebody said to me one day, it's quite interesting watching you because you sit there in a meeting and say nothing. And then when there's a lull, you're like an exocet missile. You just come in with something that is absolutely spot on. So you don't need to be noisy all the time. You don't need to hustle for that position. You need to wait for your moment, but have your thoughts clearly defined. I don't know if everybody's found themselves in this situation, but I've certainly seen it. This is a very old cartoon, and it amazes me that it still has value. Has anybody been in a meeting where you've said something and nobody pays any attention, and then 5 minutes later, some chinless twerp somewhere along the table repeats what you've just said? And it's taking ownership of that and how you step in and retrieve it. So it's still valid, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Now, I'm also conscious of the other thing I was asked to do, which is how you build a team. Now, I employed 14 people. I had a niche consultancy that worked for contractors, consultants, property developers. I had a team of 14. All of them have gone on to have great careers. I had a little dip once when I thought, most people stay with me for 5 years. Now they're only staying for 3. So I had a little bit of a dip thinking, what am I doing wrong? I wasn't doing anything wrong. Times change. People move more quickly. What was important was to find out where they were going. And when you find out where people are going when they've been with you, that was really quite revealing. They were all going on to other jobs and building their careers. It's really important to look through a new lens, to think about people who are not like you, who are bringing something new, and recognizing they may do something differently to the way you were going to do it, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. And I think that's one of the toughest things to learn when you're a leader with a team, is how you allow people to grow and deliver the answers in the right way, but doing it not the way you would if you were them. And that's quite tough, recognizing that there's new ways of finding people. We all have unconscious bias. We all have preconceptions. We all have ideas about what we're expecting or the sort of people you want. And it's important to step aside. I do some training courses on unconscious bias, and it's really interesting because you step back and realize that you're just jumping to a conclusion and it's not the fact. Then if you've got stars, spot them, develop and train them. I had training programs for all my staff. That was a condition of joining the business. And they could choose what they would learn and how that would help the business and themselves. Mediate rather than confront people. That's really very important because you want to keep your team. You don't want to have a continual fight to get them to perform in the right way. And I found my mediation training has been invaluable. It taught me to shut up, actually. Ask a very simple, non-confrontational question and allow the person to respond. And then you progress. Make learning mutual and be clear and consistent. That's the really important thing, consistency as a leader, so people know where you're going. Because when times get rough and the seas get choppy, you need people to feel comfortable that what you're running, your business, your project, you're going to come through, you're in control. I took this photograph, talking about choppy seas. I took this photograph because I haven't got time to talk about it now. 5 years ago, I chartered a ship and took 85 people to the Antarctic. And it was 3 weeks, and some of them were quite elderly. And my biggest challenge was if I was taking 85 people, I was hoping I'd bring 85 people back. And we persuaded the captain to go further south than the ship had ever been before. So this is almost literally the bottom of the world. 68 degrees, 11 minutes south. We thought we were organising a tour, an expedition with certain things, and it became apparent very quickly we were leading it. We were leading this ship. We had meetings every morning with the captain, with the crew. We had to make decisions. Crossing the Drake Passage is quite interesting. It's the wildest sea in the world. And I wrote and I produced a book and we made a film. So do different things. And that was leadership. It was making sure that everybody felt somebody was taking control and knew what they were doing. So what do I wish I had known? Well, I think, Aisha, you said something interesting about side hustles and property. My property investment has really been a side hustle because I've been a businesswoman. I've run a management and marketing consultancy, and I've helped firms and companies develop and improve their business. But I bought my first house at a time when you couldn't get a mortgage. It was a huge challenge. People thought we were mad. It gave me the equity for us to buy a cottage. We then bought a property, an office building. I now have a buy-to-rent flat. It has been done in parallel, but it has been really, really important to me. I would have liked to have done more of it, but on the other hand, I've also run a professional career. So you can do both, and they're interlinked. And because I have a master's in construction law, and because I'm a very good bricklayer, I'm a very good decorator, I can lay York stone, and I'm pretty good at plumbing, then I get builders to perform properly for me, which is good. How to make the most of networks. I look back at my very early career as a journalist, and I got through doors that I would only have dreamt about later, and I didn't recognize that. Make the most of the networks, hold on to them, remember people, recognize the value, decide which are the important battles, decide which battle wins the war. Don't focus on something that isn't really important, that just creates ill feeling. Be strategic about it, because that will save you energy and it will keep you connections. This is a subset of don't underestimate what you know. Instinct is so important. Things feel right. This is the right thing to do, even when people are saying you're mad. If it feels right to you, or you really want to do it, do it. And finally, I would say, what does success really mean to you? Not what do you think people expect in terms of success? What is important to you? I had a dip when I had a monkey on my shoulder saying, if you'd been really successful, you would have had a 5-story office building, not a 3-story office building. You would have had an office in Paris instead of simply working on projects in Paris. You would have done this, you would have done that, you would have jab, 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 monkey on the shoulder. You haven't done very well. And it took me a while to talk to myself and say, come on, face up to this. You run a business, you set up a business, it became cash flow positive in 6 months. You ran it for 40 years. You had great staff. You worked around the world. You were solvent. You had 3 kids you educated, and I like my sons. I'm still married to the same bloke. I enjoy my life. I'm solvent, and we are very fortunate. That's success, not what I think somebody else would categorize as success. And that's the really important thing. And if that's what's important to you, it makes you a better leader and you get the right team around you. And I shall stop because I think my time is up. Emma.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. That was really wonderful. So we are going to now go to Q&A. So if you would like to drop your questions into the chat box, we will pick them up there. And just in the interest of getting it going, I have a question for you, Sandy. So it's not every day that we have someone on who can say they've led a team through 3 recessions, which is quite something. And you know, we're obviously going through a very challenging time now, and it'd be really good to see, actually, from your perspective, how does this time that we're currently in differ, and you know, has your the way you're responding changed with that? And I liked how you talked about values and actually what's important for you now. Actually, I'd love to hear that.
I think these are quite extraordinary times. They really are. I mean, the worst recession was pretty tough, and it taught me to look at the detail So this sounds really silly, but I was looking at all our overheads. I was looking at our costs. I was determined not to lose our team if we could possibly help it. And I remember sitting, working through all our finances. And I discovered, and this sounds bonkers, I discovered we were double insured on our office building. And we hadn't noticed, because when times are good, if it looks all right, it just flows through.
Wow.
And because you have so many insurance policies as a business owner, as an employer, you have professional liability and you have all risks and you have employer's liability and buildings insurance and so on. You have all these different policies, and we had a broker, but he hadn't noticed, and we were double insured. So I worked through everything from the rental on the IT, or it was photocopiers and stuff at that time. And by lunchtime, I'd saved £2,000. So you really get into the guts of the business and say, what is important? What do we need to operate? What are the good to have things? We didn't take much money in the worst recession. I think reassuring your team, but at the same time being honest and realistic is important. And I think recognizing the ones who are going to be brave. A chap knocked on our door during one of the recessions and said, I've seen your business, it's very interesting. Can I just come and work for you? And I said, well, we don't have any work. And he said, well, can I just be here? I need to be with human beings. So we paid him lunch money and his travel. And after 3 months, he was pretty good. I said, we can give you a little bit of money. He then became a member of the staff. He was hungry and determined, and we found a way of getting him on board. As far as what we do now is concerned, I think a lot of it is the same. How do you trim your ship to continue operating in a way that feels positive rather than frugal? Does that make sense? You know, you say, this is how we're going to run effectively. This is what we can prune. And how are we going to work through it together? And it's tough, but if you keep everybody on board and you show that you're trimming, I think that helps. I think it's honesty. Is fundamental. You have to be honest.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Sandi. So we actually have a couple of similar questions, and in the interest of time, I'm going to bundle them up for you. So a lot of our attendees are asking, you know, how have you managed to balance your work life with motherhood, especially during the peak of your career? And I would say some of this balancing probably ties into actually how you've approached something like mediation. So, you know, so Lauren has just asked, how do you deal with conflict within the team? And, you know, I think about it that you have life conflicts and you've also got your work conflicts. Actually, how have you managed to navigate, and what's the kind of balancing act that you've been doing over so many years?
Right. I think one of the important things is knowing you're not going to get it right. You know, you'll get the horror stories from your kids for years. Do you remember the day you left me? So I turned up at the wrong school on the wrong day for the wrong boy, memorably, you know. And by the time I picked him up, he was sitting there like,
No.
I think you need to recognize that you're going to juggle and some stuff goes wrong. I think you need to, this is going to be outrageous, sometimes you need to be a bit of a slut. Forget cleaning under the fridge, right? It doesn't matter that there are dried peas under your fridge. It's irrelevant. Take shortcuts. As long as you don't poison them, you're fine. So just try to be practical, plan ahead. I used to cook all my meals on Sundays. So I'd make the joint make 2 meals, and then I'd have good old spag bol. So you knew what you were going to serve up for that week. And that takes a huge burden off you. You know that just keeping body and soul together is sorted. So plan ahead with your food. I think the other thing is to make space for yourself. And one of the things we did when we realized the business had taken off and that we were in positive cash flow, you can work all the hours under the sun when you're running your own business, as I'm sure you all know. What I did was, after the first 6 months, I planned that my husband and I would do something every Friday evening. It could just be a walk along the river. It could be friends round for fish pie. We'd go to the cinema, didn't matter, but every Friday evening we did something. We knew we'd spend Saturday and Sunday in the office working, but we took that moment on Friday evening to be us. The other thing we did, we had 3 sons, we have 3 sons. We used to divide up once a month, and I would go off with one of them or 2 of them, and my husband would go off with the other 1 or 2. Because when we were together, we talked business over the heads of the kids. So if we divided up, we had time with the kids, and you relate to them. It was once a month, that's all it was. I also exploited them mercilessly. So they stuffed envelopes and did franking and so on. But that paid off because they all got jobs because they were office literate. But I think you need to try and put some markers for yourself and put some markers for your kids. When I was doing my master's, my youngest son was doing O-levels, and he tested me on my homework and I tested him on his homework. And I said to him several years later, was it awful when I did that master's and I was doing 4 nights a week every fortnight and running the business? And he said, oh, it was all right, but I never ever want to eat frozen lasagna again. And I thought, well, if that was the worst that happened, that was fine. So I'm making light of it. To be serious, try and get a structure that keeps you underpinned. Find space for yourself and your partner. Find space for yourself and your kids in small dollops to counteract working your socks off the rest of the time. And then you just go with your instinct. It's tough and you'll get things wrong, but you can do it. You can have kids and run a business. Some bits fall off, but it doesn't matter much really. So chill out a bit. Oh, call on your friends. Exploit your friends and your mum and your gran and everybody else.
That is brilliant advice, Sandi. Thank you so much. And
pleasure.
Honestly, I think it really rings true about making space for yourself. And I think everyone who's joined us this evening, you're doing a great thing because you're making time for yourself. So, give yourselves a little pat on the back. I know we had a few more questions for Sandi just now, but just conscious of time, you will get a chance to ask Sandi your questions directly when we go out into the breakouts later. So keep those in mind. So now we're going to, I'm going to pass on to Natasha Collins, who I mentioned earlier. She has a long list of achievements already, which is amazing. But for me, the bit that I find most fascinating is, so I became a property owner quite early on in my career. And I always thought of it as a little bit like, oh, it's tying me down. But Natasha's done exactly the opposite. She's gone, I'm going to run whatever property business I'm doing from wherever I want. And so she's actually joining us from New York City. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my slides. Ready, share my screen. There we go. Okay, hopefully you've got that. All right, so hi, I'm Natasha Collins. Yes, I do live in New York at the moment. We are about to actually move out of New York in 2 weeks' time. So right beside me, what you can't see is the fact that I've got moving boxes here because we're moving down to Charleston for the winter. What do? I am a chartered surveyor. I specialize in property investment strategy, asset management, property management. I'm a property investor myself, both in the US and the UK, so I will show you a couple of those deals. I am a university lecturer. I teach the property management modules at the University College of Estate Management. I do the postgraduate and undergraduate and have an awful lot of fun with that. Semester's not started yet for the new term, but we're starting that in a couple of weeks' time. So really excited for a new cohort of students to come through. I also run my own firm of surveyors called NC Real Estate. It has a members club for landlords and property investors. I also do consultancy. And finally, I'm a mental health ambassador for Lionheart. So I have a lot of things that are in my portfolio of things that I've done. It's not always been this way, but when I came out of corporate, and I was in corporate for 6 years, I found it incredibly tough. I had put so much pressure on myself to be the best at everything that I did. I was head of asset management for a really large portfolio in Southwest London. I had all of the NHS portfolio. I did their commercial, I did a bit of their resi. I was the commercial estate manager for the Sloane Stanley estate. I was also managing other people's property portfolios and making huge changes in the area, but ultimately my whole life was pretty much sucked up in, I had to go to an office, I had to run that property portfolio, there was no flexibility for anything else that I wanted to do. And I was also doing my master's in the evening to get my degree so that I could become a chartered surveyor. It was a huge amount at the time, and I had my doubts as to whether I wanted to continue in the industry. And I had a lot of support at the time from clients of mine who said, Natasha, look, you're very good at what you do. You need to be investing in property and putting some of the money that you earn from doing this into property. So I was also property investing. I started property investing at 22 and slowly built myself a portfolio, which I've bought and sold since. So I have a lot of things going on, which for a long time was incredibly overwhelming. And then my husband said that we're moving to New York. And I was like, oh my gosh, everything that I've built up in the UK, I was doing very well at keeping everything together. Now I have to put that online. And so I had to think long and hard about what running a firm of surveyors would look like, being online. Could I lecture online? Could I run my property portfolio from overseas, considering I like to be really heavily involved in things? And being a property manager myself and an asset manager, is it really embarrassing now outsourcing that? These were all decisions that I had to make. And actually, when I first moved to New York, I didn't tell anybody, and I pretended like I was going backwards and forwards from New York to London. It was complete imposter syndrome. And for a lot of people, they were like, Natasha, this is madness. Anybody would dream of being in your position. But I was like, I think I'm going to miss out on opportunities from being on the wrong side of the world. And what do I know about being in property in America? Because it's very different from being in property in the UK. So where did I start? Well, I went out networking, and one of the very first people I met was somebody who had actually lived in London. And over a course of months, he was like, Natasha, you invest in the UK, so let's invest in the US. So I thought I would share with you one of the projects that I'm doing in America, which is currently looking a little bit like this. And just to share with you that I have massive imposter syndrome about this as well, because I am learning a huge amount about the difference between investing in property in the UK and investing in property in the US. And what has transpired is the fact that in the US, you employ people to do everything for you. So as much as in the UK, if I was doing a development project or I was buying up property, I would be the person on the ground, I'd be making the decisions. Out here, you have a project manager that runs pretty much the whole shindig for you. And even throughout COVID, we have managed to keep this project going. The big thing that we're missing out in the US is the fact that it's taking a very long time for windows and doors and timber to come. We were lucky enough that back in February, we made the executive decision that we were going to order all of our windows and doors early because we had a basement that was watertight and we could put it in there. And so this project, touch wood, hasn't been held up apart from the fact that we forgot to order one of the windows. So we've got one window that we're now not going to change. And we're going to sell it on anyway because honestly, it's a 5-month wait for us to get matching windows to the windows that we've already got. It's a bathroom window. We are just going to have to wait for it. But this is my first kind of movement into the US property market. And actually I go and see it once every 2 weeks, and I sit down and I have meetings with the contractors on site. And so far, so good. But that leads me to discussing, how on earth do you manage your property portfolio from anywhere else in the world? Because this was a massive hurdle that I personally had to get over, and the fact that I needed to buy, well, I didn't need to, but I wanted to continue buying property whilst I'm in the US, in the UK. If an opportunity came up, I still wanted to be able to do that, because it's part of what I enjoy. I run my firm as surveyors and I lecture because I love getting involved in that kind of thing. I love teaching. I absolutely love working with clients, and that takes up the bulk of my day. I enjoy doing my own property projects because it's my kind of side hustle, I think is how I would describe it as. And it's almost relaxing for me to be doing that on the side and making decisions about it. And it was very difficult for me to think about, okay, well, how does that still work if I'm not in the country? So I'll go back a little bit, and where I started taking the information of how to run property portfolios from anywhere. And I realized that when I was back in industry and I was running these big portfolios, these are go plans from the whole of the King's Road and the whole of the Fulham Road, and that was my patch. And I pretty much ran all of the commercial properties with a little bit of residential on it for 6 years. That was what I had to do. And of course, not every day, not every week, not even every month could I get round all of the properties that I managed. And so very early on, I'd have to put in place a system whereby other people help me. You cannot do everything on your own. You can't buy property on your own. I don't know anybody who has been the person who goes out and finds the property, does their own conveyancing, then goes out and finds their own tenants, finds their own lending. I don't know anybody that does that. There is always a team that surrounds you, and you've just got to find the best people for the job. And that is what I took away from this. So the solicitor that I worked with throughout my careers working on this portfolio, I asked her if when I left being in corporate, she would still look after me and be my solicitor, because we'd had such a great relationship. And thank goodness, she said yes to me, and we still work together today. I'd also put in place a system whereby I had a call answering system who picked up the phone to any of these tenants who had an issue overnight or during the day. And then there was a system in place, very intricate flowchart system, about what would happen if a tenant phoned up and needed help or had a problem or any of that. And using that idea as well, I was like, well, you did it hands off and you were in the area, so why can't you take that abroad? So using these ideas, I started to develop a property management strategy. So the day-to-day management that you need to look after if you've got your own property portfolio is essentially rent collection. You need your rent coming in every month. Maintenance, got to maintain your building. Health and safety, because we don't want anybody dying. Service charges if you're commercial or you've got a long leasehold for residential. Insurance, of course, and space planning as well. And this is all about leasing and letting. So making sure that you've got a letting strategy in place if you know, you've got a vacant unit, you need a tenant right back in there. And that really does vary depending on whether it's commercial, which you need a longer run up on, or residential, where if you've bought in a good area and there is demand, then you probably turn that over pretty quickly. But you need those stats to know what you're doing. And I've certainly got one of my resi units that needs a good 6 weeks of vacant time and then staging before I can get a tenant in. And not ideal, it's a bit frustrating, but you have to find the property manager who's going to be able to do that for you. Because if you get this right, you'll get happy tenants, So chances are they'll stay around for longer. You don't have to keep going out and putting it on the market. And secondly, continuous rental income. So you earn a living if that's what the goal is, or you get money coming in that you can put in your savings and build that up again and continue investing. To do this remotely, I had to put together a little bit of a system and keep it as simple as possible, because I don't know about you guys, but I have so much on my plate on a daily basis that I really, really hate constantly dealing with my property portfolio. At the moment, I have an ongoing leasehold tribunal, which is the biggest bugbear of mine to sort out, because daily we've got emails coming through. But apart from that, that doesn't run particularly smoothly. There's 10 leaseholders in a block up against leasehold tribunal with a head leaseholder and a freeholder who are arguing between themselves. So what I put together was a master spreadsheet, which means that I can keep everything in one place. I have a local phone number now through Skype because they allow you to do that. And then I have a list of all of my contacts who I need to get in contact with, or just the property managers. Now, I've recently switched over to property managers in Bath and London, which is where I invest, so that I don't necessarily have to be on the ground anymore, or even pick up the phone. Because for a while, going back to the imposter syndrome, one of the biggest mistakes that I made when I moved internationally was that I still wanted to keep management of one property so I could feel relevant. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Just outsource it. It was a terrible idea. It had me on the phone, and it was a serviced accommodation as well. I was on Airbnb the whole time, responding to things, phoning people. And so this really helped. And I have, if you would like a copy of it, I know Emma, I gave you the details, so that if you do need to run your property portfolio in one spreadsheet, Emma's got the details for you of how you could do that. And then how do I now do this? Well, the biggest thing is my team. I have to have a great team on the ground. Firstly, my solicitor, who always has to have my up-to-date contact details for in case I want to buy something, or I need to sell something quickly, or I need to change my mortgage. So she has to have relevant bank statements, recent passport if I've changed my passport. She needs to have proof of address for in the UK, as well as proof of address for in America, depending on where I live. Great mortgage broker, but I now have 3 of them, depending on what type of mortgage I want to go to. And again, they need all of the details that your solicitor have got, so you have to make sure that that the solicitor and your mortgage brokers, are talking so that they can share all of that information. Your accountant, who is massive for making financial decisions and knowing whether to hold in a limited company or your own name, as well as my bookkeeper. I've now got a bookkeeper who goes through and checks that rents have come in. She also does everything for my business as well, and she is now the liaison between my accountant and what I do on the ground. Your property manager and or call handling team, and I cannot recommend Devo enough, who do the call handling. They've done it for the big portfolios I've managed, they've done it for the small portfolios I've managed, and that's something I've taken with me over the years. And then having contractors on the ground who are just phenomenal. And if you get this in place, it means that you can buy property from abroad. And this was the last property I bought from America. And I actually was able to buy this property because I own the flat below. And my neighbor got in contact with me and said, "Hey Natasha, I'm selling. I know you've seen the property, do you want it?" And part of this is all about, when you're buying property, always get to know your neighbors, regardless of whether they're difficult, not difficult, absent, maybe they're in a different country like I am. I make a point to get to know everybody, because I want to be the first point of call if they want to sell. Now, I might not buy, but I want the first right of refusal. And this chap sold me this property for £260,000 because he didn't have to use an agent, and I knew the property and it wasn't going to go through lengthy conveyancing process because my solicitor already had my lease and the leases ended up being identical. So we didn't have to go through all of the checks, and the lender was more than happy to lend on the flat above as well. So with a market value of 300,000, this then gives me equity to play with, and it's a lovely net profit. And you don't get two flats together like that in Bath. So at some point I might try to join them together, maybe get the first floor, who knows. But being organized with this is something that I've had to learn so that I can continue playing around with this, even when I'm not there. And I cannot stress it enough how much you need to have a reliable team who knows you personally, who you go out and see. And every time I'm in the UK, I make sure that they're the first people I see, not the last people I see, because they keep your world running when you're not able to. Last year, I sold a flat in Putney, and it was the most difficult sale because it went on for months and months and months. And if I had not had a good solicitor on the ground, keeping me sane, who was prepared to call America and be like, hey, Natasha, can you sort this out? And I'm losing my mind because it's not going through as in the quick way that I want it to. She manages to sort that out for me. So I guess being Queen Bee in this situation is all about having a team that you trust, that you care a lot about as well. I care about my team. I want to make sure that they're able to do a good job as well. So I will always make sure that I plan ahead. I ask them what they need. I ask them what I can do to help them out so they can go away and do their job. And then they know that they can come to you and tell you what's going on. And yeah, sometimes it's incredibly stressful when things don't go through the way that you want them to. Case in point last year. But then you can reflect on it, see what happened, and see what you can do differently, or what you can get involved in, or who you can talk to about it to change things so that you can make the industry ultimately better for you. And that's, in a nutshell, how I managed to be Queen Bee of my portfolio. Running my business at the same time also requires a lot of hands, but it's about identifying the jobs that need doing and then allocating it to the best possible person. And then, as Sandi said, having that like instinct that you're doing all right and that you're making the best possible decision. And hey, as long as no one died, you get to change a decision. That is what at least gets me through the imposter syndrome, to know that I can keep moving forward.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Natasha. I hadn't heard, I didn't know a lot of that story. So for me, it was just like, oh, that's really, you know, it's really eye-opening to kind of hear all those extra bits and understanding how you've gotten to where you are. As always, we're to Q&A now. So do drop your questions into the chat. We've already got Rebecca, who's asked, I'm interested to know what are the tax implications of your situation. Obviously, we're dealing with both UK and US tax, and I'm assuming you're probably still UK resident at the moment?
Yeah, so incredibly complicated under a Trump government. When we moved out here, I was on a temporary visa, and when I changed to a more of a permanent visa class, or 5-year visa, because once we moved I could do that, for some unknown reason they actually at that time decided that they didn't I had to sign when I got my social security number that under my visa class I wouldn't work in America and therefore I wouldn't pay tax out here, which will change if I get a permanent visa. So for the time being, everything still falls under the UK, and America don't take any tax at all. But then my husband and I are now on different tax regimes. It's an incredibly complicated system that just changes on an annual basis. So if it changes at the end of the year with the change in visa class, then maybe at that point I'd have to also get an American accountant. But for the time being, I only pay tax in the UK.
Great. And I guess a similar or related question is around mortgage rates. So you obviously started investing out in the US as well. Are you treated differently just by virtue of the type of visa you're on, or are you actually treated similarly because you're based out there now?
So in the UK, because I still pay tax in the UK, I'm treated as UK based for the purposes of mortgages. So I still get access to the cheaper mortgages. In the US, don't get access to mortgages. We have to take out investor finance to purchase the whole of that building, which is on, that one's actually on 9% for the year, and we got it fixed. We pay it all back at the end of December, which was a really, really good rate. And it was only given that rate because the three of us that joint ventured together, and they considered us low risk investors.
Oh,
which is
wow.
good.
That's very good. Just shows that sometimes it's just how you structure it, or who you're partnering
negotiate.
with. Yeah, no, definitely. So I have a question here from Anne-Marie. How difficult did you find it to let go of control and trust your outsourced team?
Really difficult. I find it very difficult to let go of control sometimes, especially with the properties that I own in Bath, because I've always been heavily involved in that, because that was, I started investing in Bath because I grew up in Bath, and they were kind of like my passion project. I love it. And then I ended up finding a property manager only at the beginning of this year. So that's 15 months into being here did I end up outsourcing that, and I had to go home specially and interview property managers. I found it really difficult, and also because block managers will get in contact with me directly, not the property managers, and then I'm like, well, it's quick enough for me to just hit an email, and then I've had to go stop replying, give it to the property managers. If they need any additional details, they need to come to you need to give it to them, and eventually this will just stop being an occurrence. But I have a memory of an elephant when it comes to leases. I remember every clause. So if I feel that they're trying to get around something, I'm the first to be like, hey, this is what my lease says. We're not doing this. That was, that was the hardest thing for me. I want to be in control of my lease. I know what it says. I negotiated so that I got it that way.
No, that's brilliant. So one more question. Just moved from Adana. So amazing getting into property at the age of 22. How did you do it? And what were your early inspirations?
Oh, okay. So the reason I got into investing in property at 22 is because my client, who I got on very well with, who is the larger asset manager for the NHS portfolio, sat me down. He said, Natasha, you're not going to have a pension. And I was like, really? I don't even want to think about that right now. And he said, you're good at property management, go find a way of buying your first property. And he showed me what a business plan looked like for buying property, and I then did the business plan, and I presented it to my parents at the time with a whole remortgage strategy for them that I didn't quite know about at the time. But I was like, yeah, you guys will be fine. Remortgage your property portfolio. No, you're not your property portfolio, your home, and lend me 50 grand, I'll pay it back to you. Naively, as a 22-year-old, it worked out because I negotiated a property in London very, very cheaply at the time. That was back in 2011 when property prices were just taking off, but somebody really wanted to get out of a flat very quickly, and I was there at the right place, right time, and that all worked out. I then found a way of paying them back within a couple of years. I did a remortgage. I had set up a payment plan for them on a monthly basis as well, so that they got their money back, because they knew nothing about property, nothing at all. And whilst they wanted to be supportive, they were incredibly worried about having a mortgage, so they got all of that back. But my early inspirations were definitely my clients, because they wanted me to do the same as they were. I was really, really, really fortunate for the people that I worked with in my early 20s.
Yeah, no, that's really wonderful. Just conscious of time, everyone, I would like to invite everyone to unmute and just give both Sandi and Natasha a quick round of applause. Thank you both for your wonderful presentations and so many insights. So thank you. Okay, so before we go into the breakout rooms, I'm just going to pass back over to Aisha, who's going to leave us with some parting thoughts.
Thank you so much, both to Sandi and to Natasha. I think there were so many gems in both of your stories and what you shared. There are a couple of things that really sort of stuck out for me, and I just wanted to highlight them quickly. So one is something that you mentioned recently, Natasha, about, you know, your client saying to you that you're not going to have a pension. That was actually one of the biggest reasons I got into property as well. I think at the moment, you know, if you work, you know, you can contribute, your employer will contribute, but most of the time we don't even think about where that money goes or what they're investing in. I think, Sandi, you even mentioned as well, you know, you thought about, you know, where your pension was and realized that it didn't make sense to leave it there. So many people don't think about it, particularly when you're younger. You kind of think, oh, pensions is something that I'll think about when I get older. You really have to start thinking about it today, because the government isn't really thinking about it. And the fear that I have is I genuinely believe that by the time I get to pension age, there won't be such thing as a state pension. And the pension that I may manage to have saved up, you know, had I been employed, if the market doesn't do, if the equity markets aren't doing well, which is where they tend to invest, then there is no money, there is no pension. So what are you going to do? And you won't be able to go to the government, because, I mean, even before COVID, I didn't think the government were going to have any money. With the amount that they've been spending lately, it just doesn't make sense to rely on them. You can't. So who is going to, you know, take care of your finances or provide that income when you're older? It's going to be you. And unless you want to be working until you're very old, what I think they're probably going to do is increase the pension age and just make us keep working, because I can't actually see any other solution. You have to start planning now, even if you don't have a lot of money. It's about the beauty of what I call compounding. You don't have to have a lot, but if you can start investing even small amounts, but early, so that you can do it over 20, 30, 40 or more years, it can really make a difference. And why I love property is because the returns that you can get, I find, tend to be on a risk-adjusted basis better than what you can find in other asset classes. It's quite easy for us to understand. It's easier for us to get our hands on. It's tangible. You can see it. And another thing that I think is fantastic is it's a real asset. So in an inflationary environment, one which I think will happen given the amount of money the government's been pumping into the system, you want to own real assets because of inflation and prices are going to rise. So there are so many reasons why I think property makes sense. And I implore all of you to really, really, you know, think about it seriously. I mean, I think you wouldn't be here today if you weren't, but, you know, as Sandi said, there are going to be so many things stopping you. Those little monkeys on your shoulders will be there. It's important to listen, but don't let it stop you. You know, you will have doubts, you will have imposter syndrome, but unless you push yourself outside of your comfort zones and you know, really go for it, then how else are you going to make meaningful change? Two other comments very, very quickly. One is just on team. It doesn't matter whether you're building a massive portfolio or you're just going to have one or two buy-to-lets, you need a team. So it's really, really important. And then, you know, Natasha, you said that clients were really being an inspiration for you as well. Something that really stood out for me. So some of you will know this, some of you don't. I used to work at Goldman Sachs as an ultra high net wealth advisor, and I would advise, you know, the wealthiest individuals in the country. Even the ones who had businesses or whatever it was, and that's how they were making their money, it was actually the real estate in those businesses that also held a lot of the value. So their offices, their land, and their other things. And they didn't even realize that a large portion of their wealth was actually tied to real estate. And that was one of the sort of things for me where the light bulb went on, and I said, there is definitely something in owning property. So I will leave it there. Thank you all for listening. We are now going to move into breakout rooms where you'll be able to speak to Sandi and Natasha one-on-one, and also speak to each other, introduce yourselves, say, you know, what it is in property that you're looking to do. Again, Sandi mentioned, use the network. If you're not talking to each other, you're not going to be able to know who maybe has money, who could be an investor, who could be a great JV partner for you, who might have a deal for you, and better still, just who might be able to support you. Sometimes it can be difficult. Just having other people who are going through similar things who get it is so incredibly important. So I look forward to seeing some of you in the breakout rooms shortly.